Suresh Bhatia? No. Peggy Briggs? Here. Kathy Kukalo? No. Eric Dahlberg?
Here.
Thank you. John Garofalo?
Here.
Thank you. Greg Guerriello?
Here.
Amrath Kumar? He's not here. Don Kupka?
Here.
Lindsay Liss? Here. Dee Ortner? Here. Parshar Patel?
Here.
Carlin Reed?
Present.
Christine Reynolds?
Here.
Quasi Sadruzaman? Lois Wassoff?
Here.
That's it.
All right. Thank you, Dee. Good evening. My name is Parashar Patel, and I'm chair of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining the public hearing tonight. In June 2023, the Select Board approved the dates of the Finance Committee public hearings for the 2024 annual town meeting. Finance Committee will hold 3 public hearings this month to review articles on the annual town meeting warrant that have or may have a financial impact on the town. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from the town on its proposed fiscal year 25 operating and capital budgets, free cash, and other warrant articles. We'll also hear about the school's proposed fiscal year 23 and capital 25 operating and capital budget. We've asked the town and the schools to present their proposed budgets on the same night because these budgets comprise almost all of the spending from general revenue that will be voted upon at annual town meeting, over $135 million, as you'll see in a few minutes. This does not include spending for the light plant, water, and other enterprise funds that receive revenue from rates paid by their customers. At the second public hearing, on Tuesday, March 19th, the Finance Committee will hear from the Minuteman Regional Technical High School District, the Community Preservation Committee, the Concord 2025 Executive Committee, the Board of Assessors, Concord Public Works, and the Solar Implementation Task Force. At the third public hearing on Thursday, March 21st, we'll hear from the town's enterprise funds, including the BD Swim and Fitness Center, the Light Plant, Water and Sewer, and the PEG Access and Cable Related Fund, the town's media division. I encourage everyone to attend these hearings also. As with all public events, we expect a civil dialogue. Public comment will be limited only to the article or issue being discussed. All speakers must abide by the time limits. All public comments must be made through the chair. Individuals who speak out of order, disrupting the meeting or others from speaking will be removed. The purpose of the public hearings is for article sponsors to present and solicit public input on each warrant article. Each article impacts life in Concord for our residents, businesses, town employees, and town visitors. Questions are encouraged. However, please keep in mind that presenters may not be able to answer all questions this evening. Be assured that your questions and input will be considered as they develop final presentations for annual town meeting. Copies of all public hearing presentation materials and the agendas for each Finance Committee public hearing is included in the Finance Committee packet and will be posted and available on the annual town meeting section of the town's website, along with links to the recordings of each public hearing, which will be posted when made available by Minuteman Media Network. These public hearings are being recorded on Zoom and will be accessible on Minuteman Media's Network's YouTube channel. The public hearings are also being live streamed on the Minuteman Media's website. I expect presenters to take no more than 5 minutes. Members of the public should limit their comments to 1 minute. If you're in the public hearing room, please stand and line up at each microphone. And if you're on Zoom, please select the raise hand function. After the Finance Committee closes each public hearing, the committee will meet immediately after in regular session to discuss and possibly vote positions for each warrant article heard during the public hearing. The regular sessions are also open to the public. A few other calendar reminders. First, the annual town election is on April 9th. I'm encouraging everybody to go vote. Hopefully we can beat last year's attendance of 5%. If everybody in this room goes, we might have a chance. And the annual town meeting will be on Monday, April 29th at 7 p.m. at the Concord Carlisle High School, with subsequent days to follow. Thank you, and I believe I'm scheduled to present the first article, and then I'll hand over the podium to Carrie. However, before we do that, I do have a few slides and information to hopefully provide some context for these public hearings. So, Anthony, if you can cue up a couple of those slides, give some context as to how we got here and where we're going. All right. I'll control it. Okay, so these two slides hopefully provide some perspective of how we got here. The budget year started back last summer when this term of the Finance Committee started after town meeting. I'm not going to go through every box, but basically through the fall, we provided input to the town manager, school superintendent, school committees, and the select board as they were developing the budgets that they are proposing for annual town meeting. That process occurred through a number of meetings, as you see, from July all the way through November, and continued to where, oh, that's backwards, and here we go. There we go. Through December, January, and we're now into March, basically, at the public hearings, but it's not over yet. As I said, we have 2 more public hearings in March. We're going to have a regular Finance Committee meeting as well. We'll provide additional input to the extent that we receive additional information out of the hearings, as well as conversations we'll have with other warrant sponsors. And then we will present our recommendations both in the annual FinCom report as well as when we're at the annual town meeting in May. So hopefully this gives the context that things that you're about to hear today are not new. The warrant sponsors, the school committees, select boards have been discussing these in public meetings through the course of the year. Residents hopefully have had opportunity to provide input and get information on these warrant articles. Today is an opportunity to understand kind of where all that input has led, all right? So we talked about $135 million in spending. So what you see here is a very simple, hopeful table. This lists all of the articles that we're going to be discussing today at the second hearing and the third hearing. You can see the article numbers. I'm not going to go through these. This will be available in, publicly, as I said earlier. But basically, the budgets that we're going to be voting on are the town and the schools. These are the operating budgets, and doesn't include any capital spending that is borrowed. And you can see roughly last year, $131 million. The total sum being asked today is about $137 million, right? And so basically a 5.71% increase is what we're looking at and what we're facing if the warrant articles as proposed go through. So we sit here and say, well, you know, what does this mean? Well, if you are a property tax owner that has a bill from your property tax of $10,000 that you paid for the current fiscal year, you can see when you add up all of those budget requests at the end, if nothing else changes with town revenue, you're talking about an extra $571 for every $10,000 of your property bill. So if your property bill was $20,000, you can roughly double the $571 to basically $1,100 increase in your tax bill. Each of those bars shows the contribution that each of those budget line items contributed to the increase in the tax bill. It's a very simple, hopefully easy to understand chart. Again, not going to go through this, but hopefully this provides context for the articles that we're going to hear about over the next 3 public hearings, as well as what we're going to vote on for annual town meeting, okay? And then the last element, if this clicker works here, let's go to the next slide, because for whatever reason, there we go. We talked about operating versus capital. So you can see that we've borrowed a lot of money for all good reasons over the last 15, 20 years. And basically, currently, our total current debt that the town has been authorized to borrow as of end of last June, was $112 million. Of that, we've actually borrowed $63 million. So there's another $48.7 million left to borrow if we have to for various projects. We're gonna, if these 3 articles are approved at town meeting, we would add another $6.5 million to the total debt, bringing it to $118 million. So a little bit less than 6% of our current debt we would be adding to. So hopefully, again, this provides good context for what we're voting on and what our current status is. And with that, let us go to the actual articles themselves. All right, hopefully that provides good context for folks. And I believe I'm going to be presenting the article number 3. Is that right, Anthony? Yep. All right. So once you bring that up on the screen, I can read it. It's a procedural article that we have voted on year after year, and if there are questions, I'm going to ask, I saw Town Moderator Carmen here answer those questions. Where is Carmen? I thought I saw her here. There she is. Thank you. With these glasses, I can't see far. All right, so I will be moving at town meeting that the town adopt a rule of the meeting resolution as printed in the handout applicable to this article. Next slide, which actually has the meeting procedures. So we have certain rules relative to Proposition 2.5. So the purpose of the article is to hold spending within the constraints of those rules. As I said earlier, this is a routine article, been adopted since 1992. And basically, all appropriation articles will remain open and may be amended until the meeting adjourns. With respect to appropriations, any motion to increase any spending item above the proposed budget must specify the amount of the increase and the source of funding, whether it's a corresponding decrease in other items, whether it's an override of Proposition 2.5, or the use of other available funds. Again, procedure reducing a borrowing of authorization is not a source of funding. So, for example, if we wanted to increase operating spending from 137 to 140, we can't say, well, we're going to reduce what we might borrow for capital. Basically, that's the point of this particular point. Next one, next slide. Any motion to increase a borrowing item for which debt service is to be covered within the levy limit must specify the amount of the increase and, again, the source of the funding. Next. I will, as I said earlier, move that the town adopt a rule of the meeting resolution as printed in the handout applicable to this article. Any questions from the audience or those on Zoom or the Finance Committee? Okay, so can I go to the next article? Carrie, I think you're up.
So is it easy if I just say next slide? Okay. All right. Thank you and good evening. I'm Carrie LaFleur, the town manager. Joined this evening with our CFO, Anthony Ansaldi, our assistant CFO, Liz Rourke, and there are various department and division managers here in attendance this evening, both in the room and on Zoom. I am going to be presenting Articles 7 through 12. The first is Article 7, Fiscal 24 Budget Line Item Adjustments. If needed, this article would seek town meeting approval to make certain line item adjustments to the Fiscal 24 budget approved under Article 9 of the 2023 annual town meeting. The motion would state that the total of the adjustment and would note that this action would only transfer funding between lines, keeping the total bottom line at the same original appropriation. While at present there is no motion sought under or expected under this article, we do like to keep it open because we are continuing to monitor the budget, and we may decide that there's a need to make an adjustment before town meeting. And so I'd like to just take a moment to walk through what the presentation would look like. Next slide, please. So unlike other operating budgets, either the school budgets or our enterprise fund budgets, the town's fiscal '24 budget was appropriated by town meeting in 16 distinct line items. Lines 1 through 11 appropriate what is commonly referred to as the guidelines budget, and lines 12 through 16 appropriate what we refer to as our fixed expenses, and those are costs that are shared between the town and the school, and generally employee benefits and debt service and the like. Once appropriated, the town manager must then manage to the bottom line of each line item rather than to the bottom line of the budget, which is why we put this article on the warrant in case there's a need for additional town meeting action. There are two options to make adjustments to the town budget, either through further town meeting action, which would be contemplated here, or there's also a provision under Mass General Law that allows within the last month of the fiscal year for the town to make adjustments if those are presented and approved by the Finance Committee and the Select Board. Next slide, please. Budgets are prepared well in advance of the fiscal year, as you saw on the slide that the chair presented. We start in September, and things change. Priorities shift, and we don't always hit the nail on the head, so sometimes there are a need to make these adjustments. Next slide. If we needed a budget adjustment and it was not approved, the only other remedy that we would be able to seek would be a year-end transfer, again at the end of the year with the approval of the Finance Committee and the Select Board. And if for some reason that transfer wasn't approved either by town meeting or through this year-end process, then we would end the fiscal year with a deficit, and that would then need to be raised on the recap of the next year. So that's obviously not great for planning purposes. And that's why we do hold this as a placeholder, and in the last 5 years or so, I think we've only needed to use this once. But that is what the action that would be contemplated under this article. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions from the Finance Committee? Okay, anybody on Zoom? And nobody here. Thank you, Carrie. Next article?
All right, the next article is the town's fiscal '25 budget. Article 8 requests that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $59,674,465 for the operation of town departments and joint accounts for fiscal '25. This is a lengthy motion, and we always provide a handout at town meeting because we have to specify exactly all of the different sources of revenue. So we don't have that motion put together yet, but we will provide that as a handout at town meeting. Next slide, please. Historically, the Finance Committee's guideline process has included review of both the operating budget and Tier 1 capital expenditures. The fiscal '25 guideline provided for an overall increase of 4.45%, or $1.48 million. Of this amount, $1.04 million was allocated to the operating budget, and $455,000 was allocated to Tier 1 capital. Next slide, please. The fiscal '25 recommended budget meets this guideline, and for the first time since the COVID pandemic, does not anticipate carrying forward any prior funding appropriation to close the budget gap. The guideline, as noted previously, applies to both the operating budget, which is this article, Article 8, and Tier 1 capital, which is included in Article 9. Next slide, please. We begin our fiscal '25 budget process, as we do each year, by identifying our top strategic issues, which are noted on this slide. We then build our entire budget process around addressing them to the best of our ability within the allotted funding. Additionally, for the first time this year, budget managers were asked to view the budget process through two lenses, one being equity and inclusion, and the other being sustainability and resilience. Since our strategic issues have remained very similar through the past few budget cycles, I'd like to just let you look at those on the slide, but talk a little bit about these new budget lenses that we viewed our budget process through. Next slide, please. At its core, the annual budget is arguably the single most important policy document a community can produce on an annual basis. Budgets are instruments which reflect community commitments, values, and priorities. While we are a community with many of these, we have two overarching and shared values through which we should view our budget process, and those being, again, equity and inclusion, and sustainability and resilience. To that end, I asked each of our department managers that as they prepared their budgets, that they view their requests looking through these two lenses, both being intentional and deliberately inclusive in their decision-making process, and further keeping in mind that it is not one action or initiative, but rather a considered expression of these values our organization holds for diversity, equity, inclusion, resilience, and sustainability. To aid in a collective understanding of these concepts, I asked each of the managers to consider the questions shown on this slide, such as what are the assumptions at the foundation of the issue, and how are various groups impacted by the budget decisions that we are making. And looking through a lens of sustainability, I also asked department managers to consider, to identify how our community can reduce its contribution to climate change by eliminating greenhouse gas emissions, to prepare for and minimize the anticipated impacts of climate change, and to preserve a high quality of life for current and future residents. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Next, we identified our cost drivers, which are noted on this slide. More than 50% of the budget increase will go toward wage adjustments to more closely align salaries to market and to increase our ability to both retain existing employees and attract qualified candidates for vacant positions. We also note the continued issues we face with the supply chain, which challenges our ability to deliver services for the community. And one example that I'd like to share with you is one when we're purchasing vehicles and equipment. We're now finding that the lead time for a lot of vehicles and equipment is more than a year. And so it's very tricky when we have a budget that's appropriated for a year. We don't have the ability to pre-order because we don't have the appropriation to do so. And we're finding that increasingly harder to manage. So I wanted to call that to your attention. Next slide. Given all of the challenges and opportunities before us, again, I'm pleased to say that we have prepared a fiscal 25 budget recommendation that meets the guideline, maintains existing service levels, and does not add to our FTE count, though we are going through a careful and considered review of the organization to right-size our staffing levels, and as a result, we've had some reclassification of positions, and I think I've talked to the Finance Committee and for sure the Select Board about some of those. Next slide, please. The chart on this slide shows the proposed funding allocations for each department. I will note, I saw that we had a typo. The header that says fixed expense actually should say operating expense on this slide. The movement in percent allocation is often the result of reorganization and consolidation of services, and I'd just like to provide one example. The large increase in the general government share of the budget is generally attributable to the funding level dedicated to our facilities division, which from an accounting perspective is part of the general government cost center, even though from an operational perspective right now it operates under Public Works. Over the past 5 years, the town has incrementally moved towards a more centralized facilities service delivery method, which has resulted in better products at a better price point. Next slide, please. The balance of the proposed increase is in the fixed expense or joint accounts, and again, including insurance, debt service, and retirement expense. These items total about $26.9 million, or just over 45% of the town's budget, summarized here on this slide. I think we'll just stay with this for a minute, Liz. The second largest expense in this category is for group insurance, which consists of the employer's share of health, dental, and life insurance benefits provided both to the town and CPS employees. For many years, the town has contracted health insurance through the Minuteman Neshoba Health Group, which is a consortium of 14-member communities and regional school districts. For fiscal '25, the town will be moving its health insurance business to MIA, which is the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Association, a much larger joint purchasing cooperative. In addition to the opportunity to spread risk over a larger pool, MIA offers competitive rates, high deductible plans, and access to many health and wellness programs, while retaining the ability to customize the coverage provided by the employer to suit the needs of the town, its employees, and retirees. Next slide. The largest expense in our fixed cost category is for debt service. This category includes the annual debt service payments associated both within the levy and for excluded debt. In total, the town's fiscal '25 debt service expense is projected to be just over $11 million, which includes the permanent financing of approximately 60% of the middle school project. I will note, because we did have a question raised relative to the fiscal '24 debt. The total shown on the previous slide is the appropriated debt versus what is shown here, which is the actual, what was certified through the tax rate process. And the reason for the difference has to do with the timing of when the debt service was issued. So we can't simply include a placeholder for any of our budget numbers. So we have to put in a budget number for, in this case, for debt service. So what we include is the known debt service. And then we had additional debt service that was issued for the middle school project after the budget was approved. And I think in the Finance Committee, in understanding the timing issue, I believe made note of it in the Finance Committee report last year. But that's the difference between the two slides. So again, the previous slide shows the appropriation, and this slide shows the actual amount that was certified. And with that, next slide, again, is the motion.
Thank you, Carrie. Questions from the Finance Committee? Carlin? We'll go from that end to this end. Go ahead, Carlin.
Thank you. All right. Can everybody hear this? Is this turned on? All right?
Yep.
That's good? Good. Okay. On the, and on page 16 of the warrant, there's a reference to the salary fund transfers, which I think you're calling the wage adjustments. And in the warrant, it says that the salary fund transfers are to be reported to the FinCom periodically and then have a final report at the year. How's that reporting going to be done? That's the first question. Parsha, should I ask the other two, or should we just take one at a time? I have three altogether.
Just one at a time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I would say this is an area that we have not done a great job in the past, and we need to build in a better reporting mechanism. And I would say historically, for 15, 20 years, this has not been something that we've done. I think the job that we need to do, what we're doing is we're showing, we show the spending in a report, but we report the spending, but I don't know that we've had any substantive conversation or presentation of that to the Finance Committee.
Okay. All right, the second question is about the recreation services. In the warrant article, there are a bunch of blanks there.
Yeah.
I'm presuming that there is some money going to be spent on recreation. But my real question is, what's the status of the recreation strategic plan at this point?
Yeah, so the recreation budget is presented at the enterprise fund public hearing, and I would suggest maybe that would be a better opportunity to have some dialogue on that.
And the strategic plan, is that going to be coming out soon?
Let's talk about that when they come at the
Fine.
third hearing.
Okay, all right. Third question is this. In fiscal year '24, the annual report, there's a notation that ARPA funds were allocated, $75,000 of ARPA funds were allocated for DEI purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you tell me how much of that budget has been spent this year?
I would say a very small amount, probably around $10,000 at this point, but the DEI Commission does have several activities that are planned even for the rest of this fiscal year. They have a training program that they're looking to launch, maybe even at the end of this month.
Okay, thank you. That's it that I have.
But I'd be happy to answer the question you asked about the blanks for recreation. So starting in this fiscal year, the administrative expenses associated with the rec department are being borne 100% by the rec revolving fund. So there is no longer a general fund contribution to recreation as there had been in the past.
Great, thank you, Carrie. Chris?
Thanks. Carrie, two questions. So in the budget, it has a category called unclassified, about 800,000. Is this the salary reserve? Is that what would be in there?
So unclassified includes yes, it includes the salary reserve, it includes the finance committee reserve. Those are the two.
Yep, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is around the switch on the group health insurance to MIA. So when was that decision made? When did that happen?
So we worked with our, as required under Mass General Law, we worked with our Employee Insurance Advisory Committee and worked through that process. I think we probably started in November and worked through the holidays, and a final vote was taken in January.
In January. And is the town going to have some claim runoff requirement?
Yes.
And how much is that?
The amount we have been asked to hold in reserve is $1.3 million, and that's built into the budget projections.
It's in your budget number?
Yeah, and that would be for claims, the IBNR, the claims incurred but not received
Right.
by the end of the fiscal year.
And is that sort of timing? So they come and they say, here's everything we think you might owe us, as opposed to having the claims sort of flow throughout a year or however, whatever length of time the claims would come in. So in other words, will we see a benefit in a future year?
We will see a benefit with an overall lower health insurance cost by moving to Maya.
Right.
In this transition year, we don't expect, you can see that that budget line item is essentially flat.
Right.
That includes the lower premium cost, but factoring in that reserve we have to hold for the IBNR.
Okay. And it's 1.3 million or thereabouts?
That's the amount that we have just received that within the last couple of weeks. And that came to Minuteman Neshoba Health Group from the providers. Each of the providers identified the amount that they wanted held in reserve. There is a potential when everything is settled with Minuteman Neshoba Health Group, which has a fund balance that the town, if a fund balance remains after everything is paid, the town may see a proportional share of returned fund balance.
Okay, thank you.
Don?
Yes, hi. Carrie, First, two questions. First, the bottom line of the budget, the table's really helpful, by the way. It shows the increase from 23 to 25. Okay, so the increase is from rounding 51 million to 60 million. So that's a 17% increase over 2 years. I know that this is inclusive of debt service. Is there a breakdown to say operating has gone up by X and debt service has gone up by Y?
I don't think I calculated that. Maybe one of my support
Yeah.
staff over here could
Okay, that's
take a
fine,
look
that's
at
fine,
that.
thanks. And then the second, just further to something you were explaining, line 14B2 is the principal and interest on for CPS. You said that this is inclusive of about 60% of the middle school construction cost.
Yes.
But during the fiscal year 25, we will incur the remainder of the borrowing or perhaps even prior to it, I don't know.
I think that's to be determined. You know, we certainly wouldn't be borrowing 100% because we don't yet know that we need 100%.
Yeah.
But there would have to be some discussion based on, you know, an updated cash flow, what the interest rates are. Would we do some short-term borrowing versus more permanent? We have not.
Well, my
done
question
that
is,
analysis.
if you had to borrow additional funds that are already authorized, how would you, where would you find the budget to pay the interest on those? on that
So
borrowing?
it's exempt from Prop 2.5, so that would be an additional amount that is raised when we go through the tax rate certification process.
Okay, so when we started this meeting, Parashar showed a slide that said, which I think is really, really good information for folks, that even if we keep our operating budgets down to the guidelines, our taxes are going to go up by 5.75% all in. And I guess the question is that number at least 5.75? In other words, it could be higher because we could have additional debt service?
Well, I think, you know, that was the first time that I saw that slide. That assumes that 100% of the increase is borne by property tax, and that there are not any additional offsetting revenues, additional local receipts or state aid higher than what we projected. So I would say it's roughly accurate, but it's likely not completely accurate.
Fair enough. Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
Yeah,
Do
I
you-
just have one question. Carrie, in your presentation, and you're talking about the various categories or groups that serve under you, such as planning and land management or public safety, which of these divisions under your leadership causes you the most concern in terms of having the accuracy of the numbers?
I think what we have expressed to the Finance Committee before, and it holds true, it's personnel costs. It's not any one department, it's overall personnel costs. We have 5 of the 6 unions. Those contracts are up for renegotiation. Later this month, we will start that process. We are holding roughly about 2.5% in the salary reserve. So that's the issue. It's how those contracts are going to be settled. You know, we are in the process of doing the analysis now to determine how close or far off positions in those unions are from market. And we're just really at the very beginning stages.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so Carrie, I just have one question, big picture question. So I appreciated the 2 lenses that you're asking the department leadership to view their budget requests and prioritization, and I noticed strategic planning is sort of one of the sub-bullets.
Yeah.
We've had several conversations with the Finance Committee about the town should have a strategic plan. So I'm just curious, when do you plan to start that process? Is there money in this budget to actually initiate a town-wide strategic plan that brings together not just the town departments, but whether it's rec or other uses of town revenue?
So we do have funding in the fiscal '24 budget, the current year budget.
Okay, yep.
Nothing specific proposed in fiscal '25. And to answer your question, I feel like kicking off that process is always the next, it's always the next thing to do, and then something else happens. So my hope is that yet before the end of the fiscal year, that we are going to be kicking off that process.
Yeah, I hope, because, we've got Concord MCI, we've
Yeah,
got
that-
2229.
That's one of the things that happened that
We've
kind of
got,
threw it.
I understand, but the point is, there's a number
Yeah.
of opportunities, also challenges, frankly, right? And I think we've all seen revenue and expenses, the two lines don't match. So it's important, I think, to have a strategic plan so we can fall back on it as a touchstone to figure out how we're going to prioritize various initiatives and
Yeah.
needs. So before the end of the fiscal year, you're expecting to kick it off?
Yes.
Is that? all
Yes.
right.
Now, I think we might be thinking of two slightly different things. There's like an internal, an inward-facing strategic planning process and an outward-facing that may look more like a master plan. And so one of the things that we have talked about is just, we have a lot of individual comprehensive plans, if you will, identifying various goals and objectives, some of which don't really line up well together, or they're somewhat in conflict. So I think there's at least two ways to look at that strategic planning
So
process.
which one are you hoping to kick off? Or both, or?
I was thinking more the internal, but with the advent of the MCI Concord opportunity, I think I think the select board will be talking about something, the latter.
The external, and then, but
Yes.
what about the internal for managing the town departments as well? And again, competing
Yes.
priorities, you've, I think, done a reasonably good job of doing that, because towns always come in within our guidelines. But at the same time, right, we end up deferring a lot of things. And I think having a strategic plan that would clearly show the public, here's what we've been deferring, and here's the consequences of that, right, would be helpful, so. All right, thank you. All right, any other questions from the public? Do we have any questions? All right, let's, name and address, please. Yep.
Sven Weber, 50 Belknap, also member of the Public Works Commission, but speaking on my private behalf. In every budget process, there are also cost line items where you have to say no to. You're right now presenting just the ones you want to spend money on. It would be curious to know perhaps some examples of cost items that you had to say no to across your different departments, to Mr. Patel's question on how do you prioritize and how do you make decisions in the end where money is spent, given we all have to
Yeah.
work with very limited resources here.
Yeah, so we had a lot of no's on the capital side, and you know better than most about all of the public infrastructure requests and our limited ability to respond to that. On the operating budget side, we certainly would have liked to have been able to set more money aside in the salary reserve, so we would feel more confident that we would be able to settle the union contracts without potentially having to hold positions open in order to do that. I think the other examples, I know both in both public safety departments, police and fire, both looking for additional personnel. Board of Health looking for additional personnel to support nursing and mental health services. I think, yeah, I think those are probably the target areas that would have been, had we had more money, we would have been hitting those areas.
I'm going to go to Zoom, and then we'll come back to the room. Anita?
Thank you. Anita Techley, 260 Virginia Road. Housekeeping question. I spent some time this afternoon looking for the budget document on the website and could not find fiscal 25. The most recent was fiscal 24. I looked in all the obvious places. I'm assuming a document has been prepared, and I'm wondering how someone could access it.
Good question. We're getting the answer for you.
So I'll take that answer. Right now, you can find tonight's packet is within the FinCom's portion of the website under meeting documents. As far as the budget book, which normally we would have done, we're still a little catching up on some work with myself being new and our assistant. So we're still working on the budget book, and we would expect to have that before town meeting.
Thank you. If again, I can't stress enough the value it is to residents to have it actually before the hearing, but if you could have it in advance of town meeting so people could take the time. It's a great document. It has lots of information that we obviously don't have time to review either at the hearing or at town meeting. And I would, I know everyone's been busy, but I guess in the interest of transparency, I think it's critical that it be made more public and more accessible. Thank you.
Agree, Anita. Thank you. In the room.
Hi, I'm Terry Ackerman, Heathbridge Road. I'm on the select board, but speaking for myself. Comment and question. Nice presentation, thank you. There's one slide that is very small. I think it's the second one. And well, that one's a little small, but keep going. There's one right near the beginning I just wanted to comment on before town meeting because it wasn't readable. Keep going. That one. So if you're going to use that one, if you can make it bigger.
Just keep in mind, we have the big, gigantic.
All right.
No, I know.
If the numbers on the slide were smaller, we could make the chart bigger.
Okay, that's true.
It's always a challenge trying to present charts,
Right.
budgets.
And then my question is, I'm not going to remember the detail really well, but I do remember there was a technical error of 500 and something thousand last year. And I'm wondering, I expected, I guess, in the previous article that you might have to do some line item transfers or that in this budget you'd have to do something. How were you able to absorb that and what happened with that?
Well, it was, because of the timing, it was booked against general government. And it's still booked against general government, and we will either, we're still working through that.
Okay, maybe by town meeting we'll know the answer to that, I guess.
Well, if there is town meeting action that is required.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street, and I applaud all of you on the Finance Committee for all the work that you're doing. Perhaps you have covered this, but I've sat through a couple Transportation Committee meetings where there's been a representative of the DPW, and maybe this is duplicating my friend's DPW question here. It was throughout the years, the roads in Concord have gone up and down and up and down, and we seem to be going downhill. It was represented to the Transportation Committee that by a representative of the DPW that only about half the maintenance costs are being funded. Only half. And when he was asked whether the DPW ever pushes back against the town manager's budget and tries to get an increase, he turned quite pale and said, "Oh, we would never do that." I hope you all will look at that number year to year to year and perhaps push back and see if we can get our roads to go back up on the upside rather than on the downside. I don't know if that's a question. If there are people on the administration who would like to respond to that, I'd be glad to have you ask them that. But my question is through the chair. Thank you very much.
So,
I've got a perspective I can share, but Carrie, if you want to share your perspective, otherwise I can share mine.
what I will say, two things. That's part of the presentation for Article 9. And you will see in the capital plan, which is Article 9, that almost all of our capital plan is devoted to public works infrastructure. I know it's not nearly enough, but it's what is available. And again, it's almost exclusively dedicated to public works.
And my only perspective is, for better or for worse, the town has met Finance Committee guidelines. And when we're setting guidelines, we're in the position of trying to balance competing needs, right? We've got schools, we've got towns, other requests coming in, and we're trying to be fiscally responsible for the taxpayers, which is actually one of the reasons why I think a strategic plan that we can all fall back on and say, this is what we've agreed to for a longer term, would be very helpful, not only for hopefully the select board and the school committees, but also the finance committee as you set guidelines and urge the various bodies to adhere to the strategic plan. And we ought to be able to measure how well we're hitting each of these various categories, right? And that's how we can determine whether we need to spend more or less money on different priorities. So thank you. Next article.
So the next article is the capital improvement and debt plan. Article 9 requests that town meeting appropriate funds and authorize debt for the fiscal 25 capital improvement plan as printed in the warrant. Next slide. Much like the annual budget process, the town's capital planning process is extensive, beginning in late summer and resulting in the draft plan, which was available in December. The town separates its capital spending into three categories. Spending authorization sought for tiers 1 and 2 is included in this article. Tier 1 spending is funded through an outlay of cash, while Tier 2 spending is funded through the issuance of debt. Next slide, please. The total request for Tier 1 is $2,180,000, as detailed on this slide, and is in compliance with the town's policy on capital outlay expenditures. Next slide. The proposed plan requests $268,000 for capital items for divisions under the general government and finance cost centers, all of which is earmarked for technology, including replacement of approximately 25% of our laptop computers in accordance with the technology replacement plan. Additional projects include security improvements to purchase a suite of cybersecurity hardware and software to better protect the town's assets and data. This suite includes packages and software by endpoint detection and response and other hardware data security vendors. It also includes funding for intrusion detection analysis and penetration testing. Additional funding will be used to evaluate building security, which will include a comprehensive review of town building security, and money to take action on items prioritized by myself, the Internal Risk Committee, and our facilities and technology staff. Examples include expanding door access systems, adding surveillance, and providing better auditing of buildings. Next slide. The plan also includes $120,000 for DPLM in the building inspection office to replace one vehicle and purchase an additional vehicle for that fleet. Currently, 4 inspection staff members are sharing 2 vehicles. Adding a 3rd vehicle will assist with transportation to inspections when they occur simultaneously. There's $20,000 in natural resources, $10,000 of which is for conservation land improvements, and $10,000 for pond and stream management. The land improvements would improve soil characteristics and quality, define or delineate conservation land, preserve and protect farm fields and forest lands for the town's 1,500 acres of municipally owned conservation and open space parcels. The stream funds are necessary to address emergency response situations, such as beaver deceiver equipment to prevent flooding or to reduce impacts of climate change. And here we might be considering planting areas disturbed by flood events. In human services, the plan includes $1,500 to support the replacement of public use computers at the library and upgrade other technology. And it also includes funding for an electric vehicle to replace our Veterans Agent 2000, his 2002 vehicle that he drives to visit with his clients. Next slide, please. The plan includes $509,700 for replacement of vehicles and equipment for our Public Safety Cost Center. In fiscal '25, the town intends to replace police tasers, cruiser laptops, and 3 marked vehicles. Cruisers are used in frontline service for approximately 80,000 miles. CPD has a total of 11 marked cruisers in its fleet, 10 hybrids and 1 fully electric. $90,500 of the plan is being allocated to purchase and replace fire safety equipment and vehicles, including the programmed replacement for firefighter turnout gear in accordance with national standards. Next slide. A total of $1,129,300 is included in the CIP for the Public Works Cost Center. Of that amount, a total of $461,000 is being proposed for maintenance to roads and bridges, another $186,000 allocated to the completion of the new tree inventory and additional tree plantings in accordance with one of the core action areas identified within Envision Concord. The balance of funding will be used to replace vehicles and equipment. With each vehicle replacement, the town follows the recommendations outlined in the 2022 Fleet Electrification Study, which identifies the best fit for electrification replacement by category of vehicles. There is additional information on all of the Tier 1 spending that will be included in the fiscal '25 budget book. Next slide, please. The total request for Tier 2 debt finance projects is $4.1 million, as detailed on this slide, and again in compliance with the town's capital spending policy. Next slide, please. In public safety, we have $350,000 set aside to upgrade the records management system, the software associated with that program, and $418,200 for the communications systems upgrade, which is the hardware side, all of which will be used, again, to upgrade hardware and software used in our E911 Emergency Dispatch Center. Next slide, please. This request is for $336,500 to address significant repairs needed at 3 municipal lots, the Rideout Park, Church Street, and the Tuttle Trail parking off of Walden Street. An annual budget in a similar amount will be needed to address the needs of the 19 municipal parking lots over a 5-year period. Next slide, please. In the fall of 2022, the town completed a resurvey of a 12% sample of roads to gauge pavement condition index scores and found the average road PCI to be 68. It further determined that the current level of funding is insufficient to prevent further deterioration of our 108 miles of roadways. As it stands today, the PCI has dropped to 66. The longer we go before making the financial commitment that is needed to maintain our roadway system in good repair, the more costly it will be. Next slide, please. In fiscal '25, a total of $2,120,300 is being sought for the annual pavement management plan. Moving forward, additional funding is needed. Toward that end, at the 2025 annual town meeting, not this town meeting, but next year, I would expect that we will advance a standalone Tier 3 warrant article requesting a significant financial commitment to fund this program on a multi-year basis. Initially, we had planned to advance such an article at this year's town meeting, but in light of the transportation plan that is currently under development, we thought it would be best to hold off so that the results of that study could inform our total funding request. So again, 2025 is when we would expect to put something forward of significance. Next slide. Okay, no, you're on the right side. The plan, the 2024 plan, the current year plan, the town allocated funding for the design of an improved intersection at Main Street and Baker Ave, shown on this slide, to include the replacement of the obsolete signals and enhance safety and intersection operations. The additional funding sought here, along with an anticipated contribution from the Novo 40B housing project, will be used to implement the final design. So in the current year, we're working on the design. We hope to implement the design next fiscal year. An annual budget is needed to address other intersections in the future. Next slide, please. Public Works provides a variety of essential services to the community. Its fleet of vehicles and heavy equipment are critical assets to deliver these services efficiently and effectively. The American Public Works Association provides guidance on the replacement of fleet assets based upon asset type and the expected equipment life cycle. This information is used to help determine whether it's more economical to retain an asset or to replace it. In the case of the 2012 heavy-duty service truck shown on this slide, it has been determined that replacement is now in order. And again, additional information on all of the Tier 2 capital items included in the recommendation will be provided in the fiscal '25 budget book. Last slide. And this is the motion on this article, which again includes the appropriation of cash and the authorization of debt to fund the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Questions from FinCom? We'll start at this end first.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. This is really helpful. A couple of questions. One is about buildings. Could you point me toward any capital that's toward going into buildings? Because it seems as though we're talking about infrastructure and other necessary things.
So we are, like in many areas of the organization, going through a transition with facilities. We have a new facilities director who's in week three to this week. We did not allocate any of the fiscal '25 plan for additional funding for facilities. We do have some funding remaining from other capital articles. So we have enough to get started. We have the funding to look at the feasibility of public works and public safety, and we expect to focus on that in '25.
Okay. And the second question, in the replacement of vehicles, how do you handle the residual value of the old vehicle that we sell?
So typically we're trading vehicles, trading in vehicles.
Okay. So is the appropriation a net amount, or do you think that it's the it's the purchase that's appropriated?
Well, when we trade in vehicles, they don't tend to have a lot of value, so we are not, we're not, we do often have some thousands of dollars that would be left over, but we don't have tens of thousands of dollars. we don't assume a significant trade-in. And with, you know, where we're electrifying the fleet to the prices, it's still hard to understand what the prices are, so, yeah.
I know a lot of big kids who would like the snowplow.
Okay, we will keep that in mind.
Does that include you, Don?
We're always looking for drivers.
That's true.
All right, other questions? Don?
Carrie, on the roads, the 2.1 million in Tier 2 spending for the roads, can you quantify the impact that will have on the PCI score? Does that keep us where we're at, or does that buy us a few points?
Do you want to respond, or I know Steve is on as well? Okay.
It's just a comment. Alan Cathcart, Director of Concord Public Works. The concept is that the PCI is a general measure for the entire system. When we are not spending at a level to maintain it, our recommendation is to try and improve. But we saw over the last couple of years, we've actually gone, degraded from a 68 to a 66. We know we're not spending the amount of money that we need to recover. And we know the cost per mile is going to increase as we decrease in our PCI. So that's where I think it's really important, where Carrie and Anthony are kind of aware of this gap where we continue to lose ground. And the impact on our residents and businesses is the conditions of the roads are deteriorating. So it's not improving. We're spending money, but we're not getting back to where we need to be. So this concept of identifying the needs over a longer period of time, potentially looking at debt to try and get money so we don't have to plan year to year. It's very inefficient to not spend the money and do it in a way that you talk about strategic planning, where we have to wait to determine what money do we have, how do we get bids out, how do we get competitive bids, and how can we plan for projects that really might require multi-year investments to recover. So this concept, and I think pay attention to our messaging over the next year, so possibly we can kind of change this course and look at a way of funding this to recover. We really want to get up over 80 PCI, and once we get there, it'll cost us less to maintain it. So that's the goal. Is that helpful?
Other questions? So Carrie, I just had a question, and thank you for pointing out that next year you're going to include some of the road work as Tier 3. My question is, in prior years, you've talked about other potential needs, replacing public safety, public works, et cetera. Those are all likely to be Tier 3. And I guess the question is, the long-term capital planning process that the select board adopted talks about a 10-year plan. So at what point do those items go on this 10-year plan? Because we're kicking the can down the road by not putting it there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because then it ends up being a big surprise. So at what point can we expect, even if it's a rough estimate, to say, hey, these things are coming down the pike, whether it's in year 7 of that or year 8 of that or 9 of that?
Yeah. So with roads, we just started, and I know I've talked to the Finance Committee a couple of months ago, just started talking about the notion that we probably need a large chunk of money. It's probably no longer Tier 2, even if we dedicated the full 4 million, give or take, of Tier 2, it's probably still not enough at this point. So we're now looking at a Tier 3.
Right.
But we did, as I mentioned in the presentation, we would like to be able to incorporate the work that the Transportation Advisory Committee and town staff is doing on the transportation plan, so we can have a comprehensive request. And I would expect that in the capital plan beginning with fiscal 26, the 10-year plan beginning with fiscal 26 versus 25. The facilities I think we have heard loud and clear that there's an interest in getting a better understanding of what those costs are and when. What I will say is when we use the information from our 2020 facilities report, most of the dialogue was about the number, which was an estimate. It wasn't for a specific plan, but it was for an estimate. The next body of work that needs to be done is something more specific. Hopefully, we would have that for fiscal '26 again, but that wouldn't be, we wouldn't expect that to be in the first few years of the plan, maybe not even in the first 5 years of the plan.
Yeah, and that's fair. And again, I think all I'm urging is we put it in the plan with caveats or whatever that, hey, this is even a range estimate would be helpful. So that way, year 3 from now, folks aren't surprised, wait a minute, 2 years from now, we're gonna have this. And what about all these other needs? So, thank you. Any other questions? All right, let's go to the audience.
Hello, Mark Galis. I'm the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee, and I'm speaking on behalf of the committee. Yeah, we note the historical underfunding of maintenance of transportation infrastructure in town, which in fact is continuing through this fiscal '25 budget. But we're very strongly supportive of all the entities that constitute the town getting together over the next months or years to figure out how to make these necessary investments in order to provide, not only resilience and economic benefits and connectivity for the town, but we also feel that it's financially prudent to act to preserve this substantial existing investment that we have in our infrastructure of the roads, the bridges, the culverts, et cetera. And moreover, maintaining these is going to probably pay us back partly by reducing the number of emergency, overpriced emergency repairs that we have to do when things fail unexpectedly. So I thank the chair of the Finance Committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Wendy Ravelli, 42 Bow Street, and I have 2 questions. One, Carrie, I don't know if this is for you, but we had a capital task force.
Can you just closer to the
Yeah,
microphone?
so we had a
first?
capital planning task force a couple of years ago and established tiers for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And I thought that the equipment, the limit for tier 1 was 100,000, and in your presentation it's 250, which makes a lot more sense to me, but was that a change that I missed? And it seems like a good strategy, and having fewer dollars paid through finance through debt is a good thing. And just want to know if that was a deliberate strategy. So that's one question. And the second question is really a specific one about Harvey Wheeler and the repairs on the stairs that have not, that haven't been repaired in a while. Just wondering what the status and where that gets funded.
So yes, in the capital planning task force, the recommendations, the limits are, as Mrs. Ravelli mentioned, I would say it is changing it to 250,000 is deliberate, intentional, not necessarily approved by anybody, but how we have to, to be able to manage and dedicate as much of the tier 2 funding to roads and other public works infrastructure. We have to be able to fund up to 250 within tier 1, or we would be even further behind. And we've talked to the Finance Committee and Select Board about that, but yeah, it is intentional. The stairs at Harvey Wheeler, is that RFP, is that out?
So on a positive note, the new facility manager we have, with this gap, that was a bit of a delay. We have a consultant who's working on a design. His second week into the job, he was starting to review that with our engineering division. So I think they're looking at refining it so they understand the budget allowance and they want to make sure they can meet that. So that's internally being evaluated, and then we'll be sort of moving on, putting that out to bid fairly soon.
And that funding is in a prior year capital plan.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, Sunweaver, 50 Belknap, again, Public Works Commission, but speaking on my own behalf. I really appreciate Alan's politically correct answer to Mr. Dahlberg's question, but I want to make clear line items like $25,000 for bridge and culvert repair is definitely not enough. The $2.1 million for streets, if you look at that study that was quoted and where you saw the chart, identified roughly $27 million in backlog of investments in streets. We would need to have about $4 to $5 million spending per year to catch up. Every year we push it out makes that not linear more expensive, and they calculate if you push that out about 7 years, that 27 million is ballooning to 60 million. I just want to make sure the town understands, and I know the town needs time, and I really appreciate it. We have the tier 3 capital discussion now, but the study was done 2022. That is proposed for 2025. So we are 3 years into that 7-year postponing, so we can assume that 27 million will not be enough that they identified in 2022.
Thank you.
Dean Bayfield, 73 Walden Terrace. This is a fairly basic question. One of the slides indicated that there's a 2-year program to redesign the intersection between Baker Ave and Route 62. Would there be any participation from the state, since that's a state highway, in that project?
Do you have any response, or Steve? Want me to call on Steve? Yeah. Steve Dukran, could we call on you to make comments?
Yes, Steve Dukran.
Thank you.
Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So the highway is technically not a state highway, it's a state numbered roadway. It's still a town owned and maintained. And so the state would not participate in this project.
Thank you. Okay, next article, please.
All right, these ones should go a little quicker. Article 10 is the OPEB Trust Fund appropriation. This article seeks town meeting appropriation of the annual contribution to the town's other post-employment benefits trust fund for fiscal 25. Next slide, please. The town of Concord was one of the first communities in the Commonwealth to establish an OPEB trust fund. In 2008, the state legislature adopted a special act granting the town special permission to establish this fund, prior to there being specific authorization to do so. Later, the legislature enacted a new law allowing all communities to establish OPEB trust funds. At the 2019 annual town meeting, upon the recommendation of the town's auditor and town council, the town of Concord reauthorized its trust fund under the new section of Mass General Law. Could you move to the next slide, please? Each year since fiscal 09, the town has made a contribution to the trust fund in accordance with the OPEB funding plan. Next slide, please. The town's OPEB liability is now valued each year as of January 1st. As of the most recent valuation, the total liability was about $55 million, of which 60% was funded. The funding plan assumes a 6.75% discount rate and fully funds the liability as of fiscal 35. As a result of the town's strong funding position, beginning in fiscal 22, the remaining unfunded liability is being amortized through annual level payments, which is beneficial to the town's budget process. Next slide, please. While each of the town's major funds share a portion of the unfunded liability, since inception, only the general fund's share of the annual OPEB contribution has been appropriated by town meeting. Recent guidance provided to the town by the Department of Revenue and the town auditor is that the total annual contribution be appropriated in a standalone warrant article. Next slide. In fiscal '25, a total of $1,467,851 is requested to be appropriated across all major funds, as shown in the slide, in the chart on this slide. And that is the presentation.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions? Chris?
Carrie, I thought we were supposed to be done with funding by 2030.
Yeah, and so based on how the assets are performing, and we did have an adjustment in the census where we saw a notable shift between teachers that are split between CCRSD and CPS. There was a shift towards a heavier weighting on CPS. Those are the two things I remember from our presentation with the actuary. That's going to bounce around as the market changes.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions from the floor?
Lower. Wendy Ravelli, 42 Bow Street. I guess I didn't realize that the sewer and water fund didn't contribute to OPEB. And why is that? You mentioned significant fund, and is that why?
No, their OPEB liabilities are current. Yeah,
even better.
So all of the enterprise funds and the rec revolving fund, they have a liability assigned to them, and if they are not included, that means that they are current.
Okay, next article.
So then the next article, Article 11, is the OPEB trust fund expense. So annually we have two OPEB articles. One contributes the annual share, and this side are the expenses associated with this fund. And so just to shorten this up as much as possible, in fiscal '25, the request is for an appropriation of up to $275,000, $25,000 of which will be used for the actuarial valuation, and up to $250,000, which will be for investment and banking fees. And I'm not sure. I'm happy to answer questions. This is standard. The reason we have up to $250,000 for investment fees are under Mass General Law, we're required to appropriate those fees versus having them net out of earnings, which is how they used to be handled. And fees, as anybody knows who has money invested, fees are typically a percent of the earnings, and so we need to have a little bit of flexibility there.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't see any. Next article.
I'm taking a break. Okay.
I'm going to allow Carrie to take a break. That was a lot. So first of all, my name is Anthony Ansaldi. I've been your Chief Financial Officer since mid-October. It's truly an honor and to be here working in such a remarkable community with so many engaged residents and a wonderful team here at the town. I also want to take the opportunity to thank my assistant CFO, who's been with the town since December, working alongside me during this budget process, is here tonight running our slide deck. So thank you, Liz. So Article 12, it's the appropriation to the Opioid Prevention Programs Fund. The first slide seeks town meeting approval to transfer from free cash the sum of $76,870.49 of unspent opioid settlement funds to the Opioid Prevention Program Special Revenue Fund. Next slide. Town manager, on behalf of the town and with the select board approval, joined two statewide opioid settlement agreements between the Massachusetts Attorney General and certain opioid distributors and manufacturers in 2021 and 2022. Based upon guidance from the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office, The town expects to receive approximately a total of $661,463 through calendar year 2038. Next slide. Prior state guidance provided that municipalities could not set up special revenue accounts and instead appropriate the funds in order to spend them for purposes set forth in the settlement agreement and described in the article. The guidance further provided that the funds received prior to March of 2024 became part of free cash and can be appropriated from there. Next slide. On October 4th of 2023, Governor Healy signed Chapter 77 of the Acts of 2023, Section 9 of which provides, in part, for the following exception to the general rule that all receipts are to be recorded as general fund revenue per Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53. The guidance further provided that any funds received prior to March of 2024 become part of free cash and may be appropriated from there. That section went on to say non-recurring unanticipated sums received by multiple cities, towns, districts, and not otherwise provided for by general or special law may, upon the approval of the Director of Accounts, be expended at the direction of the Chief Executive Officer without further appropriation, only for the singular purpose for which the monies were received. Next slide. Acceptable municipal use of these funds. There are 7 of them. First one is for opioid use disorder treatment. Second one is for support people in treatment and recovery. Third one is connections to care. Fourth one is harm reduction. Fifth one is to address the needs of criminal justice involved persons. Sixth one is support pregnant or parenting women and their families, including babies with neonatal abstinence syndrome. And the 7th is to prevent misuse of opioids and implement prevention education. Next slide. So Concord's use of these funds. This is the first year that Concord's actually starting to use these funds, and there's 2 initiatives to date. Beginning next week, there will be Narcan distribution boxes both at the main library and the West Concord branch. And the second initiative that they're working on is to enter into an intermunicipal agreement with 6 or 7 surrounding communities for a regional substance abuse counselor position, which is allowed by the agreements. Happy to answer any questions. The last slide is just the motion again.
Any questions? Carlin?
Anthony, the Narcan will be available at the 2 libraries. Why did you pick those 2 locations, and why not somewhere else in addition to that? And are the people trained to help assist with the medication boxes?
So our library director, Emily's here, and she's been working with the health department on this, so thanks, Emily.
Hey, I'm Emily Smith, library director. We worked with public health, and our goal was to make it available in a place where the public would feel comfortable walking up to, that wasn't in the direct line of sight necessarily of staff, since there's a lot of stigma about taking the Narcan. So where we're locating them in the library is near the public restrooms, where there's a lot of foot traffic, and folks will hopefully feel more inclined to take some. We have them on the main floor. They're going in at Fowler between the 2 most popular bathrooms, and then right as you come in the Sudbury Road entrance on your left, where the AED machine is, they'll go there as well, and we'll monitor them and refill them as they get used, but we won't necessarily have the same pressure as they have outside of public health, where it feels very scrutinized if you go to help yourself to any.
Thank you. Chris?
So Anthony, I'm generally not a fan of hiring people with grant money, right, because it goes away. So what's the thinking behind adding a head on this, in this case?
Well, with the funds that we'd be able to be part of this consortium, and really the funds go out to 2038. So I think it's something where it's certainly beneficial, and taking advantage of that, and then 2038 comes around, I think we can at some point start putting the money aside to fund that position.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, next article, please.
Article 14 is the use of free cash. The motion that will be presented is to seek town meeting authorization to transfer $1 million from free cash for the purpose of reducing the tax rate. Next slide. Free cash is the town's undesignated fund balance. It is generated when actual revenue collections exceed estimates and/or when actual expenditures are less than appropriations. Free cash is certified each year by the Department of Revenue. It is available for appropriation after certification at any regular or special town meeting. Next slide, please. The town has an adopted financial policy related to free cash as presented on this slide. I won't go through that. Next slide. This chart shows the amount of free cash certified for the last 10 fiscal years. While we are still awaiting our fiscal 24 free cash certification, we expect it to be approximately $7.3 million, which is significantly lower than free cash levels prior to fiscal 21. Due to regular use to reduce the property tax rate, to establish the middle school stabilization fund, and to help advance community initiatives such as funding for affordable housing. Next slide, please. This slide shows what our free cash will be assuming if all free cash appropriations being sought at the 2024 annual town meeting are approved. If all are approved, the town's free cash will be reduced to approximately $6.3 million or 4.78%, which is slightly below the policy requirement. I would note that this is not likely to be a cause for concern with our rating agencies, but certainly they have noticed or taken note of our continued use of free cash and that it has been at policy minimums for several years. If another funding source is made available for, I'll just skip that. I did also want to mention, I know the Finance Committee asked if there was any unused portion of the assessor's overlay that could be used for free cash. The assessor's overlay, the balance is about $1.95 million. And at this point, the answer would be no. And the main reason for no is because, as you know, the town recently enacted the residential exemption, and we need to understand what the impact of late filers will be on the overlay. So with the residential exemption, we had a lot of people apply before we set the tax rate, so that was very helpful because we could take those exemptions into account, but people are able to apply until April 1st. And so any exemptions that are granted after the tax rate has been set, they will be funded through the overlay. So the assessors, Board of Assessors, are not yet in a position to talk about reducing overlay by any additional amount.
Hey, all set?
Yeah.
Thank you, Carrie. Questions? Chris?
So Carrie, on that chart, you can go back, the chart that rolled forward, that one right there. So it doesn't show the $600,000 that's going to middle school stabilization. Is that coming from somewhere else?
Oh, it should show. I'm sorry, it should show that.
Okay, so the number is actually going to be lower?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what the percentage is then, but I don't know how low you want to go. I'm not that comfortable being that, being far under the 5%.
Do we, asking staff, do we have an estimate on when the free cash, fiscal 24 free cash will be certified? And or if the 7.3 is still a good number, or we still think that's a good number?
We actually think it might be a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So it could be in the high 8s, and we would expect it to be here back by the end of this month.
Okay, so that's 6/30/23 you're talking about, right?
6/30/23 is what we're working on certifying.
Right, so that's what you think is the 7.3, which could be higher. Do you have a roll forward to what you think 6/30/24 is going to be?
No.
No?
Too soon.
Okay. Okay.
So to be clear, the 7.3 might be 8 something?
Yeah.
And high 8 something? So high means higher than 8.5? I mean,
Let's call it 8 then.
Well, otherwise you'd say mid. Okay.
So we can provide an update to you Maybe even at your next meeting.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because I think we'd probably want to reserve voting on this until we get some more precise numbers.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Nobody there? Mary?
Hi, my name is Mary Hartman. I live at 16 Concord Green. I'm a member of the Select Board, and I'm speaking for myself. This particular article is something that we do routinely. We've done it for at least a decade. And it began when you see that the reserves were at a very, very comfortable level of 12%, 11%. We're no longer at that level, but this has become a habit that we do every year. And it's really not a best practice to take money out of a reserve to fund operating expenses. So I guess I would ask the Finance Committee to consider weaning ourselves from this bad habit, either by withdrawing this article altogether or reducing it by a certain amount. I'll notice that, Chris, you brought up that this doesn't include the 600,000. It also doesn't include the 350 that the 250th committee is going to be asking for public safety. So that's 6.3 on the next slide. Liz, can we go to the next? That's 6.3. If this particular article is approved, we go from 7.3 to 6.3. There's another 600,000 lined up for a stabilization transfer. There's another 350,000 lined up for public safety. So we're dangerously low. So I guess I would just ask the Finance Committee to consider either withdrawing or at least reducing this amount. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, next article, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lori Hunter, Superintendent of Schools. We're really privileged tonight to be here to talk with you about the regional school budget for Concord Carlisle High School. To start us off, we'll just talk through the numbers and where we are as of right now. The overall regional budget is this $38,974,907. Concord's percentage of that would be $26,140,908. And that's as of right now. We're still working. We're 120,000 off of guideline, and we're studying where we're at and watching all the moving pieces. We're going to give you a few revenue updates which go the wrong direction. We're watching student signups, which sometimes we can eke out some savings. So I just want to stress we're still working. You can find all of our budget information in the budget books that are posted on the school webpage. If that's hard to navigate, just let us know and we'll be happy to direct you there. We're back on track after missing 1 year last year when the business office leadership turned over. And I just want to comment before we bring any of the school budgets, the strategic plan. We are in year 1 of a renewed 5-year plan that'll operate us from 2023 through 2028. We have 4 core objectives and initiatives which drive all of our work, the lens for servicing children and providing programming, and all of the activities that we do and the requests that we make are funneled and vetted through that strategic plan. And I just heard so much talk on that tonight, I wanted to just stress that at the outset. Next slide. When we look at the breakout of the budget right now, the salaries are accounting for 2.46% of the increase. And I want to just stress that that takes us a lot of work to get to. COLA increases and steps and lanes and other increases often come in beyond that, and we have to work backwards to try to be sure that we bring you the most responsible budget possible. Non-salary accounts, which unlike the Concord Public School budget we're going to talk about in a few minutes, at the region we carry a number of other factors that are not in the CPS budget. So this year that total is 4.11%, and we're going to detail that in a minute to break it out. The overall total operating budget increase this year is 3.08%. When we look at salaries, you'll see here the CCTA salaries, which are our professional teaching staff, is a 1.3% increase. Again, that takes us a lot of work to get to because between COLA and steps and lanes, that's a higher number. This year I've actually riffed a few folks based on enrollment numbers and tried to be sure we are right-sized. So that's been one factor, as well as assuming some retirements and attrition to allow us for some lower salary costs. Non-teacher salaries are up 5.7% this year, and that's basically due to the restructuring of the administrative team there. We really needed a fourth person, and in adding that, we have increased that number a bit over prior years. We are rolling off a very effective retirement incentive plan that we rolled out a number of times over now in my tenure. And as these payments come off, we saved great savings in replacing high-paid veteran staff who retired and bringing in less experienced folks. As the payment plans roll off, where they take the benefit that they received, we also get to see a little bit of savings. When we go to non-salary accounts, next slide, thank you. I'll just highlight a few things. Bob Connery, Assistant Superintendent, is here to answer any detailed questions you might have. We had some adjusting to do to make sure utility costs were covered, especially electricity at the high school, which is the bulk of that significant increase there in utilities. Special education is obviously a huge driver in the public schools, so this is the transportation side of that discussion and some increases there. Contracted services are up a bit. That can include some of our DEI initiatives. Fixed costs for us include insurance and retirement costs, so those are up 2.5%. And then I won't outline all of the others: supply, technology, debt service is here, as well as out-of-district tuitions, which we continue to be able to see some decline in because of the in-house programming that we've built. We wanted to be sure to bring a balance of excess and deficiency, which is the regional equivalent to free cash. We have felt fortunate to be operating at just under the cap as of the last few years. COVID had its very small perks, that might be one, 4.9%. And you'll see here that is with us still using $300,000 annually out of E&D. Similar to the conversation you just had, that's been something we've been able to sustain. It's well under what we had been using many, many years ago. But always on my mind is that, you know, if E&D becomes low, that that's going to be a challenge, and we need to keep an eye on that process. We wanted to note that just like the town, we have runoff costs to the departure from Minuteman Neshoba and transfer over to Maya for health insurance. The regional runoff costs are estimated at $395,000. Our only option is to go to E&D for those costs. So we will be proposing a reduction to the school committee from 4.9% down to 3.8% in upcoming school committee meetings. We also manage OPEB and have been, I feel, quite aggressive in trying to be sure we're on top and well prepared. We are estimating to be fully funded in 2030 with that same asterisk if things can deviate some. Based on the trajectory provided by the actuaries, we were able to reduce the contribution a little bit this year, which was a little bit helpful to maintaining the budget increase that we were able to bring in. We wanted to name that our COVID funding for us is ESSER. We are in the very last months of availability of these funds. We have until September 30th to use them all. We are on track to do that. Anything remaining that hasn't been encumbered will be small items that we will be sure to spend out. But our COVID subsidies are dwindling and rightfully planned so that those are expiring at the end of September. In looking at the overall assessments, which are the numbers you would be most focused on and how they play out and impact the town. So if we look at Concord's share here this year right now, while the operating budget is at a 3.08%, Concord's percentage increase to the assessment, which is the Concord portion of the overall budget, is 3.8%. Carlisle is 2.89%. I want to remind you that over the last 2 years, especially last year, Carlisle saw some of the most significant increases it had ever seen due to enrollment changes in the numbers of kids. So that has shifted slightly back to Concord. If we go to the next slide, you'll see what that looks like. Again, the numbers don't have to change a whole lot for some fiscal impact. This year, the The assessment change just because of the enrollment, which is different than the operating increase, is a $55,000 number. We wanted to name a few risks because of factors that we are watching closely as the spring comes upon us. The cherry sheets from the state have revenue under what we budgeted, so we're keeping an eye on that and trying to be sure that we can monitor that. We're also watching our own FY24 spending and matching that up against what we've budgeted in 25 to look for trends positively or negatively. So those are the highlights of where we are at. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lori. Questions from the committee? Carla.
Dr. Hunter, I was looking at your budget book. Yes, I actually read it. And it indicated that your expected population for the high school students was going to be going down over the next 5 years. By 91 students is the estimate. Do you have any idea of whether you intend to bring that number back up with perhaps more Metco students or something else?
Well,
or the input?
Great question. Yeah, we are down a bit at the high school by about 100 students this year, which has been a long-awaited relief valve for an overcrowded high school from the previous years. That's allowed us a little bit of section adjustments and FTEs. I am very closely watching multiple projects in town. First was the homeless shelter, which has had minimal impact on the high school. 240B projects coming on, MCI property. I think all of those are really important factors that we have to keep in mind. In terms of METCO students, our focus is always to bring them in young and then sustain them as they age up through the schools. We're very focused on that right now to make sure the Alcott population an incoming number of students helps to keep the program really strong. So we're never not watching enrollment, and with a lot of these variables at play right now, we're certainly going to be keeping a close eye.
Hi. Couple questions. On the, just actually, this is a comment, so for the public. So the debt service is included in the high school's operating budget. For guidelines purposes, debt service is considered a fixed non-discretionary cost. So we exclude it from the guidelines. So when debt service goes up, there's no penalty on the operating budget. When it comes down, there's no benefit. So although there's a $90,000 decline in debt service this year, that doesn't impact the guideline process.
Right.
So although it shows 3.08 as the increase in the budget, it's really 3.8 versus the guideline, which was 3.26%. So I just wanted to make sure people understand that difference. It's kind of inside baseball unless you understand how the math works. My question goes to that the MIA run-out claim. So you mentioned that the only place you can put it is E&D. Why can't you put it in your property insurance accrual? Why can't it be in the budget?
Do you want to?
We don't have the funds.
Yeah, it could, but we'd have to cut other things.
The FY24 budget at town meeting, or vote to appropriate it in FY25 as an additional expense. We didn't want to do that. We felt like we were above guideline.
You have to come to the mic.
I'll start from the
Yeah.
beginning. Bob Conry, Assistant Superintendent of Finance. We could increase the FY24 operating budget or FY25.
Right.
We didn't feel like that was something that was prudent when we had close to 5% E&D, particularly for FY24, and for FY25 we were cognizant that we were above the guidelines. So technically we could have done it, but we didn't think it was the appropriate thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? So I had, Don, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. I noticed in the slide, following up on Carlin's comment about enrollment, there was a large drop this year. Was that a drop that had run through all the years and we knew it was coming? Okay.
We were watching and waiting for it to
Okay.
come, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a big decrease. Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 7% decrease. It's big. Yeah. So two questions. Can we go back to the slide with the ESSER, the COVID stimulus funds?
Sure.
So if memory serves me, many of these funds were used to actually hire positions.
One position at the high school.
So 697,000 total was used for one FTE and the rest was for other stuff? Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And so the one is built in now to the budget, which is what Chris was fearful for the other one. Okay. And then,
Oh, and actually, I just riffed one with that.
So
Bob
two.
is whispering in my ear to remind me that I cut the other one.
So two were hired, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. I understand, but they were hired before you riffed them, so there were two hired. Right, okay. And then on the E&D stuff, 5% is the target, right? In other words, they don't want you to go above 5%?
We are not allowed to go above.
Okay, so is there a minimum threshold?
No, 0 is the minimum.
No, I mean, there's no legal
No,
requirement
but
that you need 0, right?
as a reminder, in 2018 or so, we were put on a watch list by the bond rating folks because E&D was below 3% and we had no circuit breaker carryover. So you don't want to drain your reserves. Exactly the same conversation you were just having. You don't want to drain those reserves too low.
So and when you say we, meaning the regional school district's bond, right?
Correct.
So 3 to 5, it sounds like maybe the range. I'm trying to just understand that range.
You want to be over 3. You can't be over 5.
Yeah,
4
so
is a
3 to
sweet
5 is
spot.
kind of what we're aiming
Sure.
for. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Next article, thanks.
All right, I'm going to invite...
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
sorry.
Member of the public
Oh,
is
sure.
going to ask a question. Totally zoned, I'm sorry. No, nobody online has asked.
Sandy 50 Bernab, speaking on my own behalf. I was on a school board for 8 years, serving 6 of them as a treasurer. And I'm stunned that there are certain key performance indicators missing here, like cost per student and, let's say, students per teacher. Specifically, cost per student over a year would be very key, also linking to the reduced student numbers, because if I make the math, if the cost goes up by 3.8% and we are losing close to 7% of students, the combined cost increase per student would be a 10% increase in cost. So it would be good to see where the cost per student over the years goes, also how this benchmarks against other schools here in the region, and how is that also linked to benchmarking academic success. I think these are key things. We cannot just look at single budget line items. We have to bring it back to the cost per student.
That's all in the budget book if you want to look. It's been in previous slide presentations to the school committee.
So then you can talk about it, or
Sure.
show it.
Yeah, we always are trying to watch the time, so thanks for the feedback.
No other questions online? We'll go to the next article.
So I'm going to invite Regional School Committee Chair Tracy Morano up to talk on where we are with the amenities building.
Thank you. Tracy Morano, 39 Partridge Lane, Chair of the Regional School Committee. We do not have slides on Article 21, but rather an update from our last meeting. So we received feedback from the Select Board on February 12th and the Concord and Carlisle FinComs on February 15th. As promised at both meetings, I brought the article back to the Regional School Committee. We had a discussion on February 27th regarding the status of the amenities building article. The school committee discussed potential options as to how to proceed given the feedback from both towns. The school committee recognizes the financial pressure facing both towns, and we are looking to be a partner with both towns. The amenities building is on our agenda for Tuesday, March 12th. We will update the select board in both towns and the FinCom in both towns after that meeting. We discussed 3 options as to how to proceed. As the first option, Dr. Hunter recommended the school committee fund a feasibility study that would also produce a recommended design that could be used to secure bids for the amenities building. The study would be funded using $153,000 remaining from the CCHS road paving project. These funds can only be used towards capital expenses and cannot be allocated towards operating budget. As a second option, a school committee member suggested that instead of using the $153,000 in unspent capital funds, we amend Article 21 to ask only for the funds necessary to complete the feasibility study and recommended design of the amenities building. We could then use the $153,000 to offset the project. The third option would be to proceed as planned with the original warrant article requesting a total of $2.3 million to be split between both towns per original agreement, which would assess $1.8 million to Concord and $600,000 to Carlisle. In this scenario, that $153,000 would be used to offset the cost of the project. In the first two options, we'd be delaying the project a year, which would allow us to seek grant funding to offset the cost of both towns. It would be our intention to apply for CPC funding in both towns, and we would also pursue the Municipal Americans with Disabilities Act grant program. We would also continue to look for other sources to offset the cost of both towns. We were also asked to look at alternative options to our current situation. If we were to rent an upgraded option with electricity and running water, the rental and maintenance fee would be approximately $7,700 per month. We currently pay roughly $900 per month to rent and maintain our portable toilets. This is not a viable option as we cannot increase our operating budget by $77,000, as we are currently not at the guideline set by the Concord Finance Committee. A prefab building was another alternative that we were asked to pursue. I've not had much success in finding a company that could handle a building with the requisite number of restrooms required per the Massachusetts Building Code. As presented to the Select Board, the Concord and Carlisle FinComs, and the Concord Commission on Disabilities, this facility is necessary to meet the needs of our community, especially those with physical disabilities. Our district strategic plan strives to build an inclusive culture. One of the goals of the strategic plan points directly to the accessibility, and it states, outdoor spaces are accessible to all students. It's imperative that we come up with a plan to move forward with this project in both towns to serve the needs of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? So there was one question I think that had come in from the Finance Committee.
Sure.
How are the risks discussed over the past several months being addressed and mitigated in the meantime? So we heard in the winter, urgent 5-alarm fire. So in the meantime, what are we doing to address the risks that you've talked about, right?
So we had sent to the Finance Committee in our October 26th memo of, kind of where we were with the amenities building project. There's no alternative to what we can do. We have what we have, the 3 portable toilets that we currently rent. That is what we're doing. We don't have an
So
alternative.
you have no mitigation for
No.
the risks that you've talked about, basically, is what I've heard.
There really aren't any other options.
Okay. Don?
Tracy, I'll be happy to speak with you more, but I just wanted to clarify one point from our last meeting that I think was a bit of a misunderstanding, perhaps.
Sure.
The occupancy of a building is determined by a number of things. The amount of egress and the number of restrooms factors in. We've all seen signs in restaurants that say capacity 50 or whatever it is, and you look and there's 100 seats. And it's because the bathrooms are inadequate for more than the number of people. But it doesn't mean you have to upgrade the bathrooms. It means you limit the capacity. So if you had this project with a half of the number of toilets, instead of having a capacity of 1,800, you could have capacity of 900. Even though there are seats for 1,800, you can limit the capacity to fit the other constraint. So it's just something, more flexibility for you to work.
So I did look into, when you look into the Mass Plumbing Code, this is how I read it, you can clearly correct me if I'm incorrect, but stadiums are public facilities, much like theaters. It's stadiums and theaters, and I think there's one other connection with that. And it doesn't matter how many people are there because they are public. It's the number of seats that you have, which is still that 1,800. So even if we have 500 people in the stands, you still have to, because it's a public space, it goes under that part of the plumbing code. And if, Dr. Hunter, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that I've seen the same issue come up school after school that goes before the plumbing board. That's why there's a 50% variance opportunity there. I would love to, I've learned a lot about plumbing code because I've worked a lot on the gender neutral pieces as we build the new middle school. I understand the ins and outs of how you get plumbing code changed. It's not easy. But we could continue to talk on that. It's not necessarily going to fix this issue, but it is based on the possible number of seats that could be filled, not how often you use it or not how many people are usually there. I've not seen anyone say we have 1,500 seats, but we only use 600 and be able to get by with that.
I appreciate your experience. I've designed these things, And in my experience as an architectural designer was that you can limit the capacity on the occupancy permit based on the number of facilities you provide. And as long as you adhere to that, you're okay. But you'll...
Yeah, we're going to
So let's not have this discussion here, because frankly, all of this, for me personally, points to the need to have a study funded, because none of us are experts in this. So let's not have the discussion here. Peggy?
I'm just curious whether this facility will be open to the general public all day, every day.
So what we found at other schools, it is available to the general public. So at Westford in particular, they have their AED machine and the Narcan that is available. They have cameras surrounding the facility. I think that they limit the access. They're not completely public about how much it's open, because obviously we don't want things happening there overnight. I mean, I think that would be locked on an overnight basis, much like what happens up at the Doug White Fields. So there's a process for that, and we would have to develop a similar process as to when to have the facilities open.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see anybody on Zoom, so we'll go to the room.
Sven Weber, 50 Belknap, speak on my own behalf. So first question is more on procedure. So you're going now back, you're looking option 1, 2, and 3. If you're making a decision for option 3 to still have the article in town meeting, will there be another public hearing, or is this the public hearing in case you bring option 3 to town meeting?
I think that would be a discussion that the chair of the finance committee would have to answer.
And I'm looking at the moderator. I'm assuming this is the public hearing for this question, regardless of the way the school committee ultimately proceeds. Is that correct? There we go.
The moderator is nodding.
Okay, so I think I would let's say strongly recommend you're taking this off the warrant and really do the study, option 1 or whatever you call this, that you look at completely outside funding sources, do fundraiser at a school, look at grants. $2.3 million in total is more than the whole town spends per year on roads and other infrastructure. And the town needs to really look into the prioritization of capital expenditures. The school got last year, the additional money for the road, to redo the road. This is 2.3 million now, and I assume you probably have other things in the pipeline. You should build a complete capital planning project from your end, make this transparent to the finance committee, to the capital planning process of the town, and come ideally for this year, raise the funds somewhere else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dean?
Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. I guess I would just say this is something that's been overlooked for a long time, and I'm glad that there's some momentum behind it. However, I guess I would be more in favor of seeing you pursue option 1 and 2, where you're studying or otherwise deferring to a future proposal. One thing I would prefer to have the schools do before they bring something to the town asking them to spend money is to go to the plumbing board. Go to the plumbing board, ask for 25%. See what they say. See if you can get 30%. We're just assuming that we have to build 50% of the level of bathrooms that would be required at Foxborough where everybody's drinking. And that's a big number. There's a lot of people who need the bathroom at Fenway or wherever another stadium is built. So, a 50% reduction for high school fields, et cetera, is a very rational thing, especially since there's no beer sold. And we might ask for less. And if we can get less, maybe we don't have to spend as much. So I think before you come to the town asking for money, you should have a hard number that the plumbing board has agreed to. I think that would be the best approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Dean. Any other comments? Oh, go ahead, Dee.
Yeah, I have a question for you with regards to option 3. If you bring option 3 to town meeting and it fails, what is your and it has to pass at both towns, what's your backup plan?
So we will proceed in the fashion that we have been for the past 9 years, which will be 3 porta potties at the field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't think there's any more questions, so next article.
Thank you so much.
So now we're going to turn to the Concord Public Schools budget. I'll start by saying we are at guideline with the Concord Public Schools budget, so we'll share some highlights. This coming FY25, the budget request is $46,515,714. And I'm going to explain the next portion of the motion. We've been very grateful for some collaborative work with the town manager and the town moderator through her. You will recall we had received subsidy for transportation of children living in the shelter to their school of origin, which is where they were attending if they had already been in a school. We were part of a pilot program, thank you to some advocacy by our legislators. The refund came in November or December to the general fund for the CPS kids instead of to the schools. So we've been really collaboratively trying to figure out how to get that back to the schools to help with the cost, ongoing cost of transportation. We are always going to get 100% refund. It's really a cash flow problem. So this isn't us asking or getting more money. This is really just taking money that's already been received and getting it to the right bucket. Okay, thank you. Here are some highlights of the budget broken out by category. I'm not going to go through too many of these, or if any. Again, we're always working to get these as low as possible, and we had some success here. We had a decline in out-of-district programming, and so that allowed for some offsets. I did also right-size some other spots in the CPS budget, so we've riffed 5 people this past, notified 5 people of potential rifts, unless attrition allows them to stay, to also offset, in addition to planning for some retirements and other things to work towards getting to the 3.26 guideline. A little more backup to that, if we go to the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. We had an increase in district administration. You can see the breakout there. It's a fairly small category, so the percentage goes up fairly quickly without too much change there. It's level staffed. Teaching and instructional support on the next slide. This is where the teachers are, so, and the support staff, so you'll see obviously that's our biggest increase. Always trying to offset the COLA and steps and lanes with other savings. I do want to note the 5 FTE increase for special education support staff. That is just simply based on the needs of children. It's a combination of one-to-one needs and programmatic needs for some of our intensive programs. We are actually, and I'm going to highlight the math grant that we just received. We've really been much more successful as of late with some competitive grants through DESE. I think they're opening up eligibility, and the demographic isn't necessarily always the driver, and the grants have been very well aligned with our strategic planning goals. So the ask we had put into the budget was for $120,000 of new math materials. We've been able to reduce that in half because the state is going to pick up half of the cost. If we go to the next slide, other school services. Mostly contractual wages. We had a one-to-one nurse that needed to be added. If we look at maintenance and operations, also in the 4,000 category, an increase of 3.3%. We are already, incorporating different operational costs of the new middle school. FY25 has the challenge of 3 buildings online at different points and different times with different needs. So we've already started to budget for the wastewater treatment plant there for a portion of the year. And utility costs with 2 older buildings online and the new one coming on. We did our best to work with the building construction team and project leads to get those numbers where they are. If we go to the next slide, fixed charges. That same retirement incentive program is phasing out here as well, so that last payment will be going out with the decrease there. And we had small ticket items of various needs of equipment across the elementary schools that are student-centered needs in that 7,000 category. Out-of-district tuitions, I think, CPS is a tale of, I think we're going to go over time. We have approximately 15 students out of district, and we've still been able to bring a couple of them back. So overall, we've been in really great shape with special ed programming outside of the school district because of what we've built inside. And you can see some of our circuit breaker and IDEA, which is the federal entitlement grant, and what those numbers are looking like based on our best estimates as we built the budget. Just a few notes on the homeless shelter and the work we're doing there and what we have been receiving. Currently, we're servicing 39 children from the shelter within the Concord Public Schools and CPS. 23 of them are at Willard. I think what's important to note is we have very effectively been able to stay within the state subsidy of $104 per day for those children and meet their needs. You can see we've used the grant funds for an ELL teacher, an additional kindergarten instruction at each classroom, all who could speak the children's native languages, first languages, some contracted services, and a family coordinator. Preschool, we have been just getting really creative. We've brought preschoolers into our current programmings. There's 6 of them attending now at Ripley. Because we had added a classroom for Concord enrollments, we had a little bandwidth to accept those 6. We don't have capacity to take more without another classroom, so we have volunteers working at the shelter in a play space and running a really robust, not quite preschool program over there right at the hotel with no costs attached, and that's proven to be a gatekeeper. Again, we're only servicing 4-year-olds, though, in terms of preschool. The state's not subsidizing it, so they haven't insisted on us serving 3-year-olds, which all of us, I think, are struggling with a bit because of the level of need. But so far, we have been able to maintain that and make that our plan for this year. And then ESSER updates at CPS. We have essentially expended all of those funds, like the same deadline would be for the fall, but we have plans either encumbered or in works for those. And that leaves us with just the overall budget of a 3.26 increase, which we feel really good about. We know there was a lot of support last year for a more significant increase at CPS. I think because we received that, we were able to keep this under control this year and hopefully set the stage for that going forward as long as possible.
Thank you. Questions from the FinCom? So 2 questions. One is similar to the ESSER. So the $2 million, how many FTEs did we end up hiring there?
2? 1 or 2?
It's 2, and we looked at those.
Come to the mic.
It was 2 FTEs, and as we looked at kind of the needs in terms of positions we ended up reducing, we prioritized retaining those positions over other positions that we riffed.
So 2 out of that?
Yeah, 2.
Okay, and the rest of the 2 million just went for other stuff? Okay, yep. And Laura, you mentioned the state's not subsidizing preschool?
Correct.
How many students are we taking on?
So right now we are servicing 6 4-year-olds at Ripley and have embedded them into our classrooms. We're servicing another 12 at the shelter. There are 15 3-year-olds that I'm not servicing right now and hope we can get to them as soon as possible. The 4-year-olds will come to kindergarten at Willard in the fall, assuming all stays status quo, which all signs seem to be our shelter to be among the most stable in the state right now.
And any effort to try to get money from?
Oh, I am relentless with anyone who wants to talk to me, from the state legislators to the early...
So what's the status in terms of any receptivity?
There's an understanding of the need,
Yep.
and in my 6 months of advocacy with DESE, EEC, who's the early childhood side, the state reps, the Secretary of Ed's office, no one's been able to actualize on it. They offered alternatives, which are a hard fit to us. For example, early intervention, where it's already established, they can accept children from the shelters, but we don't have that system here. There are vouchers available for kids that they have actualized, but you have to have child care centers that can accept the vouchers. We have very few. And then in some cases, in the couple kids who did have vouchers and attend, one of them had needs well beyond what the child care center could manage, and they ended up with us anyway. So there just hasn't been a vehicle to fit our community and our needs.
And so how did you prioritize the kids, that's tough.
So the play space at the shelter has been where we start all of them, and then the ones who can't be successful there are the ones we're bringing to Ripley.
Okay, cool, thank you. Questions from the audience?
Sven Weber again, 50 and up. Are the students' number going up or down?
We've seen some decline in enrollment. Again, I'm watching all these moving pieces at the 40Bs and everything else, but we have seen some decline. We're at about 2,200 students, which is about 100 down from where we had been
So
5 years
less.
ago.
Roughly 5%, 4% less.
It's 100 students. I don't have the percentage off the top of my head.
Yeah, then
Yeah.
it's 100 over 2,200, so somewhere 4%. So it means effectively the cost per student go up by over 7%.
Well, we're always watching what the enrollments require. So we're right-sizing classrooms. We've reduced the number of classrooms at some of the elementaries. I think some of what ends up offsetting that are the special education needs that have soared so much, both here and at the high school. So those numbers don't equate exactly because the needs of the kids in some cases are beyond what a typical per pupil spending might be.
Yeah. Again, it would be more transparent to
Yeah, again.
show the cost per
Yeah, we
student
hear you,
over- yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you. Next article.
Thank you. And then finally, for the CPS capital project, which a lot of folks in the room have talked with us a lot about, I'm just going to preface this by saying we are in the late stages of a full facility study of the 3 elementaries in Ripley so that we have the big picture of needs and can then work with everyone to prioritize those needs. So because of that, we reduced our request from the $900,000 earlier in the budget season to $446,000 with 3 projects targeted. So if we go to the next slide, you can see we are at the tail end of a campus improvement study at Thoreau after the fire and just delayed maintenance and some other needs. We felt the need to get a big picture. We are bringing that proposal to the school committee later in the month so you can see what the hope is for the campus, both in terms of space for children to play and run, upgrading erosion controls and a whole number of those types of things. So we have slated $200,000 in this year's request, which we'll share more details on as the study rolls out and wraps up. To match that, we actually have an estate that left us $200,000 towards Thoreau that we're allocating toward a rebuild of upsizing the playground and making it more accessible. And then from there, we'll have to see how far those 2 pockets of money go and what else is left to be done on that campus. We are in a safety need of upgrading the fire alarm system at Alcott, so we left that on the request because of its relative urgency. And then I guess we could all compare old dump truck pictures, but I didn't bring any. Our dump truck's 20 years old, and we are limping along, so we did leave that $150,000 here. It's not quite as big as the one the town is asking for, so the cost is less. So $446 for this year. We also, as you can see, eliminated all the small things that had been in the plan earlier. We haven't really figured out how to manage all of that. Some of it will be deferred, some of it will have to be incorporated into the operating budget, but we did loud and clear here that if this money is going to be borrowed, which we're open to talking about in the future, we needed to be sure that we weren't just asking for small ticket items.
Great. Questions? So, not surprisingly, I've got a question around the capital planning process,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So the facility study will be for CPS and it'll be done. What's the plan for taking the recommendations there and developing a true 10-year capital plan that includes tiers 1, 2, and 3 for CPS?
So that'll certainly be the next conversation we have with the school committee as we all process the report and study what the recommendations are. I think we want to do that collaboratively with all of you because it's time to get all synced up and on the same page for sure. So I think that'll be the discussion I think the timing's going to be good because we're going to get it in the spring. We'll get town meeting behind us and hopefully I'll have some bandwidth to start a capital discussion. I think you heard me hope that could be what we would tackle.
So can we commit to having in the capital plan for next year, September is the timeline in guideline, in the process that was adopted for the schools in the town to have an integrated 10-year plan that gets presented to the select board and the school committee as these are the first numbers, and for the public to provide input.
I'm not sure I can be the one to say yes to all of those people that are involved, but we're
No,
going to
that's
do our
fair.
part to share what our needs are and then collaborate with everyone.
And then what about regional school district? I know in the past you've
Yep.
mentioned that, oh, the building's too new, but frankly, the fact that we had the restroom building come up was a bit of a surprise to folks. So I'm curious, and you've also already put down a marker for potential track.
Yep.
And so I guess the question is, what's the resistance to actually doing a study there and incorporating it now versus waiting until the building hits 10 years of age or 11 years?
Best practice is to wait until 10 years, so we're trying to be thoughtful. The study costs money, and we didn't want to do it too early. So I think the committee can continue to talk about that. We're in the same direction of trying to be sure we build that comprehensive plan. The amenities building, the track, those are, old discussions that have come back to be looked at. To me, that's a different bucket than the what do we need to do with the systems and supports at the high school to keep all of it online and do proactive maintenance and try to avoid any major repairs.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I guess I would just err on maybe not getting surprises and doing it a little bit
Sure,
early while we're
understood.
doing it. So that's
Yeah, totally fair.
Okay. Other questions? Otherwise, I think we're done with all the articles.
All right.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. Oh, there's one more, yeah. Sorry. Disappoint everybody. Is it me? I hope not.
No, just one more. Article 25, the appropriation to the middle school stabilization fund. This request is to appropriate $600,000 from free cash to the middle school stabilization fund. Next slide. So back in fiscal '21, the town established a middle school stabilization fund to help smooth the debt associated with the middle school project. The initial deposit was $2 million from free cash. The chart shows the deposits that were appropriated at town meeting in the various years. This is established as a separate fund, so we track interest. I do want to reserve the right to look at those interest earnings. As you may know, we're transitioning between two accounting systems, and some of those numbers don't look quite right, but that's what we pulled. But we do allocate interest earnings by fund. And so as it stands right now, including interest, we have about $4.7 million in the Middle School Stabilization Fund. Next slide, please. The Finance Committee recommended $5 million, so we're close. This $600,000 would actually put us over the $5 million. And the reason, or the up to $600,000, that is the interest that we earned in fiscal '23 on the bond proceeds, the idle bond proceeds that we have. And we feel, even though we're not legally required to do that, it makes the most sense to allocate those to the Middle School Stabilization Fund. Because they had to fall to free cash before they could be appropriated and transferred, and that's why it's coming from free cash versus a direct appropriation from another revenue line item. And that is the request.
So Carrie, I think you just said you're not required to. You're not required to do what?
The interest earnings on bond proceeds are general fund revenues, so there's no legal requirement. They don't belong to the stabilization fund.
So there's no requirement that we have to give it to the stabilization fund?
Correct.
We can just leave it in free cash?
We can leave it in free cash.
Carlin?
Carrie, when do we start using the stabilization fund?
Our expectation would be in fiscal '26.
And could we, use the 600,000 instead of leaving it there? Could we not use it to reduce the borrowing we're going to do for the second tranche of the school? I mean, is there,
So
what do we
it has-
save on
it-
the interest by doing that versus this? I guess what I'm,
It has to be appropriated to be used for any purpose,
I understand that.
including reducing what we borrow.
so could, I mean, is it possible for us to get roughly an estimate of if there's any cost difference long-term for, on part of debt service, doing it one way or the other? Or is there not going to be? See, you see my question? Because this money is eventually going to be used, right? To pay down the borrowing.
If it's placed in the stabilization fund.
Well, right, versus just taking this money and just reducing the amount we borrow by 600,000.
We don't have a warrant article that would do what you're asking.
I understand, we would have to do it next year.
Right. Oh, yes, yeah.
I understand.
We're happy to talk about this
Yeah, if we
further
can
with
talk
the
about it
finance
offline, that would be good, thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? People are still awake. They are indeed. I hear laughter. Nobody on Zoom. All right.
Thank you.
I think we are done with the public. I need a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
That was quick. Call the rolls.
We have to call the roll to close the meeting?
Hey, just raise your hand. Just quickly call the roll.
No roll call.
Just call the roll. Suresh is not. You gotta speak into the mic. Speak into the mic, though. Just call the roll.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Let's call the meeting to order. I'm calling the Finance Committee meeting, regularly scheduled meeting to order. It is 9:34, and we have a quorum, and so let us proceed with the agenda. Well, we have to leave the Zoom open.
No, I'm saying there's no members on Zoom.
Yeah, no, we're just going to do voice fit. That's what we did last time to close it. Can we pull up the agenda, Anthony, for the FinCom? And so while Anthony pulls up the agenda, the reason we've got two major agenda items, we're going to go through the articles we just heard about, and to the extent we feel comfortable voting on them, we'll just go through them. If we feel like on a few of them we need to think about it and come back, we've got a couple other meetings at which to do that. So we're going to run this train efficiently and try to set a record. All right, so, although I don't get penalized until, my clock doesn't start until that's up. But Article 2, let's start the discussion. Or Article 3, let's start the discussion. Do we feel like we need to discuss it, or can we vote on Article 3?
We can vote on Article.
We can vote on Article 3. Can I get a motion, please?
I move affirmative action.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All right, Article 3.
Well, you do have to say, are
Sorry?
any
Oh,
opposed?
is anyone opposed? Anyone want to abstain? Okay, Article 3 is recommended by FinCom. So, Article 7 for affirmative action. Please put that in the minutes for me. I'm not the most eloquent here. Oh, Article 7, I'm just going to read the title here. I should have had my act together, but we will get it together. There we go. Fiscal year 2024 budget line items. Do I hear a motion?
I move that we recommend affirmative action
Did I?
on Article 7.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Anybody want to abstain? Carmen's going to provide us some input on proper procedure.
I think there's no motion expected under that.
Oh, okay. Really?
Well,
I
no,
watched-
but I think,
What one?
but we
What-
don't know, they're keeping it open, so I think if it is moved, we can deal with that in the report. to say
Well,
that-
just the interesting question is whether you can vote on it without knowing what
What
the
it is?
number
Oh.
is, or
Oh.
whether there's going to be a motion. Just thinking.
So maybe we should pass on this?
I mean, what you can do on something like that is just hold your recommendation until the floor at town meeting when you find out what the town is gonna do with it.
Hold recommendation?
Can I get a new motion? Oh, hold on, somebody speak into the mic so Zoom can record it for minutes.
I move that we do what Carmen said.
I second the motion to recommend at town meeting.
There you go. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? No. Any abstentions? No. Okay, Article 8, fiscal year 2025 town budget. Any discussions? Any motions?
Recommend affirmative
Into the mic, yeah.
Recommend affirmative action on Article 8.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody object? Any abstentions? It passes. Article 9, capital improvement and debt plan. Any discussion? No discussion. Who's going to give me a motion? Who hasn't made a motion yet?
I move affirmative action on Article 9.
Second.
All right, any discussion? No discussion. Can I get a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody want to oppose? Any abstentions? None. All right, Article 10, OPEB trust fund appropriation. Any discussion or comments, questions, concerns?
I move affirmative action on Article 10.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Article 12, appropriation to the opioid prevention.
Article 11.
Oh, sorry, I skipped around. Okay. OPEB trust fund expenses, Article 11. Any discussion? Can I get a motion, please?
Recommend affirmative action on Article 11.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? No abstentions. Okay, Article 12, appropriation to the opioid prevention program fund.
Recommend affirmative action.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No abstentions? No abstentions. Article 14, use of free cash. So I think we're going to defer on this until we get some more information, right?
Yes.
Okay. Article 20, CC Regional School District, budget.
Excuse me, Parshar, what was the decision on 14? I didn't get
We're
that.
going to defer until we get some more
Defer?
information.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep. There's no vote there. Article 20, I recommend we again hold because they're sharpening their pencils. And we hopefully will get an update. And so we can go up until literally the last minute, right? Hopefully they'll come in under guidelines. Article 21, 3 options. Should we discuss this at our March 14th meeting or do we want to have a discussion today?
Is the school board meeting going to take place before our March 14th
Yes.
meeting? Then I think we should defer for discussion until March 14th.
That's fair. I guess I'm going to just state my position. I think we should go for option 1. And the reason I think we should go for option 1.
Why don't you repeat option 1?
Yeah, so they actually discussed 3 options, right?
Yep.
Feasibility study using the road pavement project, 153,000 that's left over. Option 2 was to amend the current article for 153K, basically use that. And then option 3 is original as amended. Now, the reason I would go with option 1 is I think it's better to have a study done and try to buy time to get the grants versus without a lot of information right now, starting the train by basically putting in a warrant article that says we're headed that direction.
Parashar, I agree with you.
And then Mike.
I agree with you substantively, but that's not the question.
That's right.
We have a warrant article before us. We don't have an article that's proposing option 1 or 2. I think what we need to do now is decide if we're going to defer further consideration until our next meeting.
Yep.
And then we'll know. If, in fact, they decide to go with their option 3, we will vote on this article.
Yep.
If they go with option 1 or 2, presumably they're going to be withdrawing this article, or they're going to tell us they're amending the article, and we can include that in our approval.
Right, and I think what I heard was option 2 is to amend the article. And all I'm saying is right now, I'm just expressing my personal preference that they come to us with option 1. That's all I'm expressing.
Yep.
For the, I know, I just did, for the reasons, right?
I agree with you, Parashar. But I think we should put that in our minutes, and hopefully they'll read our minutes.
Yes.
Since they have departed. But, no, the minutes, I think the minutes should reflect that we prefer option 1, even though it's not in the article. And if they come forward with a revised motion approved by the town moderator, then we can recommend at town meeting.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure we can say we prefer, because I just expressed my opinion. I've heard several other folks say they agree.
I agree.
But if we want to put it in the minutes, we can either take a vote on it or just leave it as some members, a few members, whatever.
Yeah.
Preferred option 1, and we'll see what they come back with, of course.
I think that's
Eric?
I have a question, I think, for maybe Anthony. I'm assuming, I think we're all assuming that they can use the unspent portion of the paving project for this study, and they don't need any sort of action from the select board or anybody else. Is that they can do that?
I would say no.
They cannot do that?
In my opinion, no.
And why?
I think it's something that we'd have to review with town council, but, town meeting voted for road work, and it's not, has anything to do with that, so I would just want to double check whether or not that could be used, but you're asking my opinion right now, I think no, but we'll double check.
My understanding is it was not voted at town meeting, that they found the money in their operating budget, 400,000, and some other budgets, and patched it together and built that road without town meeting approval, because town meeting
They had
was
800,000
not
from
gonna
the
vote
town,
for it.
Peggy, but you're right, there was 400,000 that they got from an internal fund. So there's a part that was, committed to by town and a part that wasn't. So it's a good question.
My memory is that that they had a stabilization fund, and that stabilization fund was created by them through a town meeting article, and that when a regional school district does that, they don't need town meeting approval to take money out of that stabilization fund. So if that's where the money came from, then they can use it. But I'd have, that's my memory where the money came from, in which case they would be able to use it.
My recollection was it was going to come to town meeting, and there was not a lot of support, so they went back to the drawing board and found money within their own resource categories and did it themselves.
So, well, yeah, just, Tracy, the 153 that you guys mentioned, where is that actually coming from? I think this is the question we're wondering. Is it coming from the road project?
It's coming from the road project.
And that was approved by town meeting, is that correct?
Yes, the road project was approved by town meeting in both towns, and it went to the ballot in both towns.
And it was specifically for the road paving project?
Yes.
Okay.
But there was another 400,000 that you used, right, you had to, the bids came in higher.
Yes, the bids came in higher,
Right.
so then we had we had prepaid our computers.
Right.
And so and that was a COVID blessing.
Right.
That we were able to prepay the computers, so then we did not prepay the computers, and we used that money.
Right, so the question is, where does the 153 come from?
So
Is it-
they're reconciling the paving project right now,
Yeah.
and so that is where the surplus is right now. So it came in under, so now we have that 153, that's where it's from. And I think I sent you.
No, you did. And
That memo,
so,
yep.
so it sounds like it's a mixture of money from the town meeting approval for road paving and other money.
So have you
Is
asked
that
council
what-
whether it's okay to use it?
We're
To
going to
re-
have
to
to.
repurpose it?
I think we would have to ask council to
Yeah,
repurpose that.
Okay, that was kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just have to
Okay.
wait.
We just have to wait, so we don't even know.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, thank
That's
you.
okay, thank you. All right, let's go to the next article. The decision is we're waiting. I mean, again, personally, if we can use the 153, I would prefer option one, but we'll see. Yeah, but we'll wait. Okay. Next article. Article 23. Any discussion around Article 23? I don't hear any. Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve?
All in favor? Aye. Anybody oppose? And any abstentions? None. Okay, Article 24. Any discussion?
I think I might want to, since they're going to be presented the plan on Thoreau, I think I wrote down that was soon, right? Was it at the end of this month?
The plan on Thoreau?
Yeah, the 200,000 that's in there for Thoreau.
Yeah, isn't that tied to a study that won't be done until after?
No,
town meeting?
no, there's, I thought the superintendent said that was something they were going to have later this month, that the Thoreau plan is going to the school committee. So.
Want to wait?
Yeah.
If it's easy enough, I would like to. I'd
Yeah.
like to understand what the 200,000 is going for.
I agree with that. I'd like a little more specificity on that.
Yeah, that's what I would like.
I don't have a problem with that. Anybody else concerned about?
This is Article 24?
Yeah,
Article 24, no vote.
Well, it's a defer.
defer, yeah. Okay. Article 25, appropriation of the middle school stabilization fund. So this is the one we were
Yeah,
kind of
we don't know yet.
talking, we
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
And if we can get a little bit more information,
So what I was saying to Parashar, when we came up with that back a couple of years ago, we did a calculation to figure out how much we thought we needed based on what the impact was to the tax bill. That was obviously before we actually knew what rates were going to look like, so I think it would be useful to ask the town to redo that calculation and sort of show us if we put another 600,000, what does that do? Is it really necessary, or is it something we should leave in free cash? So I think we need a little more info before we should vote on that one.
Yeah,
No, I agree.
agree for another reason, which is, it was
Microphone.
interesting, it was very interesting to see what impact the interest that was paid had on the total balance.
Yeah.
And our recommendation was 5 million. And if the money's not going to be drawn down
Right.
for another year at least, then, we may break through that number or get very close to it on
Right, I
interest.
just think we should redo it, refresh it, and see what it
Yeah,
looks
I
like.
agree with that.
So how do we go about that request?
well, we just made the official request here.
We made the official request?
Yeah, we can talk to Anthony
How
about how to
close
get
to
it done.
5% should we be getting?
Sorry?
How close to 5% should we be getting on the free cash? I mean, it's
Oh.
4.9, 5.1, where should we be?
We should be over 5.
Above
We should be above 5.
Can we afford to go below 5%?
I don't want to. Personally, I don't want to. But
I feel comfortable going below
but
5%.
it sounds like they think there's free cash is going to come in higher towards 8. So I think that may be another one that we just wait on.
The two are related, right?
Yeah.
They're going to
Yeah.
get us information on the free cash. And if we can get information on the stabilization fund, kind of where are we can then make a decision because the two interact with each other.
And actually, the question that Mary raised, right, about, well, do you want to reduce the million? That's a question for us, right? Because it's all tied, right? So that'll have an impact on the tax rate for sure, but we should look at that.
We
yeah?
could actually reduce it to $1 and make a point of what's going on, that we can't afford to
Reduce
keep
what to
spending,
$1?
spending.
Reduce what?
One of the.
The 1
I'm sorry, reduce what?
$1 million, no, Article 14, $1 million out of free cash. Reduce that to $1
Oh.
to make a point of what's going on in town. Think about that.
So let's, I think it sounds, oh, Suresh?
More of a question for Tony is, like, when do we plan to borrow the rest of the monies for the middle school? Because that would determine the rate and also, trying to get what the total requirement will be for the stabilization fund.
So Kerry brought that up earlier, and it's something that it depends on cash flow. We're looking at interest rates. We could end up doing a short-term borrowing, so we don't know yet. We're going to have to consult with our financial advisors to really determine when the best time would be to go out and borrow for the full amount.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to discuss, just to recap, we're going to hold off on the use of free cash. We're going to hold off on the regional school district, so 14 and 20, and 21, and 25.
And 24. And
Oh, right,
24.
because of the 200,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Did the clerk capture that?
Oh, of course.
I feel confident by the tone of that answer back.
14, 20, 21, 24.
And 25.
25. Got it.
20, yeah.
Next agenda.
Okay. Next item is there's no correspondence, is that correct?
Right.
And then we've got our minutes.
Yeah, minutes.
Next, scroll up. Minutes is next. Correspondence, we didn't have any, and can we approve the minutes of January 18th? Everybody had a chance, so Dee, these are the minutes that were corrected last time, right?
The minutes of January, whatever the date was, 18th, had been amended, so they're here for final approval.
And can I get a motion, if anybody's ready?
There is one correction that I will make to that minute, which is a 20, changing 31 to 33.
That's it. So, the amendment to the minutes of January 18 will be amended in item number 5 under 2024 annual town meeting. It says that Article 31 also is added to the list. That 31 should be Article 33.
As amended, as amended. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. Any abstentions? Okay, let's go to the minutes for February.
Okay. February 15th, I have received comments from Carlin. I've received comments from Chris. Is there somebody else who gave?
I sent you comments.
And, yes, and Parashar sent comments. So I think the best thing for me to do would be to go home and amend these minutes and bring them back next week.
Okay.
With all comments included.
Okay. I love that idea.
Okay.
Anybody object?
Nope.
Next week, next meeting.
Next week.
Right?
So before we adjourn the
Next-
meeting, I just
next
want to
meeting.
remind folks, we have a regularly scheduled meeting on March 14th, which is next week,
Which will be the March 14th meeting.
which is the regularly scheduled meeting. We are going to discuss and possibly vote on 14, 20, 21, and 25. Can I capture all of them? Right? And we have presentations from the 250th Committee, Nagard Pond, In-Town Solar, Stormwater, and Minuteman. So we're going to hear from all those, have opportunities to question them, put them through the third degree before the public hearings.
Who has CPC?
Who does?
Who's the liaison in
Peggy
CPC?
is. Peggy.
Peggy? So I'll catch up with you after the meeting. So I want to talk I have a question about their approval on the schools. And we haven't really had any discussion on any of their items,
No.
so
Yeah.
I don't know how we're going to get that. Usually we've had a discussion with the liaison on it before we come to the hearing. We haven't done that, so I don't know whether you're prepared to do that at the next meeting?
Peggy,
I will be in California.
into the microphone.
Parashar, I think I've already mentioned this to you. I will be out of town next week.
Is there a way to get an update from CPC that you can give to either me or somebody else? Sorry?
Can we invite them,
We
Parashar?
could invite them.
Let's see if they can come,
Anthony's gonna
because I think that would be,
Anthony and Liz are gonna make it sound.
okay. That would be great.
Okay, so
My
we've decided to
apologies.
invite them as well. All right? Okay. It is a few minutes past 10. Do we have any other businesses? Do we want to go home and watch the next hour of the State of the Union?
Okay.
Who stays up that late?
Okay.
You adjourn.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
So moved.
Thank you very much. See you guys next week. Have a good weekend.